The screen door slammed and you ran straight for the kitchen because something was bubbling on the stove, something sweet and cheap and made from almost nothing. Black mothers in the 1960s turned pantry scraps into desserts their kids still dream about. Here are 30 cheap desserts that had every child begging for more. Frozen Kool-Aid cups went by a dozen names depending on where you grew up. Huckabucks in New Orleans, freeze cups in Memphis, chili bears in Chicago, lily dillies if your neighborhood had its own language for everything cold and sweet. The recipe cost almost nothing. A packet of Kool-Aid, a cup of sugar, tap water, and whatever Dixie cups or plastic bathroom cups your mother could find. Mixed, poured, frozen overnight, and sold the next afternoon for a dime or a quarter from a porch, a side window, or somebody's front steps. You learn to eat them a certain way, scraping the sugary ice layer off the top first, then working down to the concentrated syrup pooled at the bottom. Strawberry was the color that mattered most, tied to a tradition older than Kool-Aid itself. West African hibiscus teas called bissap, red drinks that traveled through slavery and emancipation into every celebration that followed. Nobody called it cultural heritage. They called it a quarter cup. And on a July afternoon in 1963, that was enough. Sock it to me cake showed up on kitchen counters everywhere after Duncan Hines printed the recipe on their butter cake mix in the late 1960s. The name came from Aretha Franklin's Respect and the laugh-in catchphrase that followed, but in black households, it became something more personal than pop culture. You took that boxed mix, added sour cream, eggs, and oil, then swirled a ribbon of cinnamon, brown sugar, and chopped pecans through the center before pouring the batter into a grease bundt pan. After baking, a thin vanilla glaze went over the top while the cake was still warm. The glaze pooled into every ridge of the bundt shape and hardened into a crackly sweetness that kids picked at before anyone cut a proper slice. It showed up at church picnics, Saturday visits, and repasts after funerals, always carried in covered with aluminum foil. Your aunt made the best one. She swore it was the extra egg. After she passed, everyone tried her version. Nobody got it right. 4 ingredients in 5 minutes. That was all it took to make Kool-Aid pie, and that was exactly why every kid on the block knew its taste by heart. 1 packet of Kool-Aid powder, any flavor, stirred into a can of sweetened condensed milk until the color turned electric. Then a tub of Cool Whip folded in gently, the whole thing poured into a store-bought graham cracker crust and slid into the freezer. No oven, no thermometer, no skill required beyond stirring and waiting. Cherry turned the filling neon red. Grape made it purple enough to stain your teeth. Lemon lime gave it a color that didn't exist in nature. The pie came out firm enough to slice, but soft enough to melt on your tongue, sweet and tangy and cold in a way that felt like summer crystallized on a plate. It cost less than $1 to make in 1967, and it fed a whole family with enough left over for the kids who showed up at the back door asking what was for dessert. Egg custard pie required so little that its simplicity was the whole point. 6 ingredients, a single mixing bowl, and a grandmother who knew the oven by feel rather than numbers. Eggs, milk, sugar, vanilla, a pinch of nutmeg, and a pie crust. That was everything. The custard went in liquid and came out set, silky, golden on top where the nutmeg dusted the surface like freckles. The origins ran back through centuries of European baking adapted in Southern black kitchens where eggs and milk were cheap and always on hand. This was the pie you made when budget wouldn't stretch for fruit or pecans or chocolate, and somehow it satisfied deeper than all of them. Big Mama's version was the standard in most households. She didn't measure the nutmeg. She shook the tin over the filling, until it looked right, and it always looked right. You could follow her recipe to the letter today, but without her hand on that tin, the top would never look the same. But before box mixers took over the counter, some of the best cakes came from bottles. Coca-Cola cake was pure 1960s alchemy, a chocolate cake with actual Coca-Cola in the batter and the frosting, plus a handful of miniature marshmallows melted into the icing until it turned glossy and thick. The soda added moisture and a faint caramel tang that plain water or milk never could. You creamed butter and sugar, sifted cocoa and flour, then poured in the warm Coke and watched it fizz through the batter. The frosting was its own event: butter, cocoa, and more. Coca-Cola heated together, then poured over powdered sugar until it ran smooth. Chopped pecans went on top while the icing was still wet. The whole thing set up fudgy and dark, almost too rich, but never quite, and it traveled well, which mattered because this was the cake you carried to the church supper in a 9x13 pan covered with foil and a folded dish towel on top to keep it warm. The secret ingredient in chocolate mayonnaise cake was the secret itself. Nobody told you what was in it until the pan was empty and the compliments had already landed. Mayonnaise replaced both eggs and oil, and it worked because mayonnaise was already eggs and oil, just emulsified. Hellmann's printed the recipe on jars starting in the 1950s, and by the early 60s, it had slipped into black kitchens across the South and up through the Great Migration cities. The cake came out impossibly moist, darker than regular chocolate cake, with a crumb so tender it almost fell apart on the fork. Cocoa powder, flour, sugar, baking soda, water, vanilla, and a full cup of mayonnaise stirred right in. No cream and butter, no separating eggs. The finished cake got dusted with powdered sugar or frosted with a simple chocolate glaze, and people ate it without ever guessing. When someone finally told them, the reaction was always the same: silence, then laughter, then a second slice. Sweet potato pone was the dessert that came before sweet potato pie, and the people who remembered it never let you forget the difference. The word pone came from the Algonquin apon, meaning baked, and Gullah Geechee, Native American and Caribbean kitchens, all had their own versions. There was no crust, just grated or mashed sweet potato mixed with molasses, eggs, spices, and a little milk poured into a greased baking dish and baked until the edges caramelized and the center set into something between pudding and cake. It was denser than pie, earthier, with a chew that crust couldn't give you. In the 1940s and 50s, when flour for pie crust was an expense some households couldn't justify, pone was the answer. It used what grew in the yard and sweetened it with what was already in the pantry. The women who made it grated the raw sweet potatoes by hand on box graters, their knuckles raw by the time the dish went into the oven. Every neighborhood had a candy lady, and every kid knew exactly which house was hers without a sign or a storefront to mark it. She sold candy, chips, pickles, soaked in Kool-Aid, frozen cups, and juice from her living room, her porch, or a side door propped open after school let out. In Memphis, they called her by name. In Chicago, she was just the candy lady on the corner. In New Orleans and Philadelphia, she was an institution, buying bulk candy at the warehouse store and reselling it piece by piece for a nickel or a dime. Her house was the after-school stop before you went home. She knew your mother. She knew if you were supposed to be there. She didn't tolerate fighting or stealing, and she kept a mental tab if you were short on change. The frozen treats she sold, Kool-Aid cups, sometimes with a Jolly Rancher, frozen at the bottom, were the cheapest dessert on the block. She wasn't running a business. She was holding the block together, one quarter at a time. You could hear peanut brittle being made before you saw it. The low rumble of sugar boiling in a heavy saucepan, the wooden spoon scraping the bottom in slow circles, and then the sharp hiss when baking soda hit the molten candy and the whole pot foamed up like a science experiment. The recipe called for sugar, corn syrup, water, raw peanuts, butter, vanilla, and a teaspoon of baking soda added at the very end, which was the moment that separated the women who could make brittle from the ones who burned it every time. The candy had to reach 300 degrees exactly, and in kitchens where the only thermometer was a candy thermometer from the 1940s with a cracked glass tube, the old women tested it by dropping a thread of syrup into cold water and listening to the snap, poured onto a buttered slab or a greased cookie sheet, stretched thin with a fork while still molten, then left to cool and crack into golden shards. You couldn't make it on a rainy day. The sugar pulled moisture from the air and went soft. Homemade fudge was the dessert that taught you patience or punished you for not having any. Cocoa, sugar, butter, milk, and vanilla went into a heavy pot and cooked over medium heat, stirred constantly until the mixture hit softball stage on the candy thermometer. Then you beat it with a wooden spoon until it thickened, lost its shine, and started to hold its shape. That beating was the whole battle. Too little and the fudge stayed glossy and never set. Too much and it turned grainy, crumbling when you tried to cut squares. Every mother had a version. Some used evaporated milk, others added marshmallow cream for insurance, and a few poured in peanut butter at the end for a streak of salt. Christmas was fudge season. It went into tins lined with wax paper and sat on the counter next to the brittle and the Divinity. When a batch failed, it became fudge sauce, poured warm over ice cream without apology. Nothing wasted, not even the mistakes. And then there were the desserts that carried something heavier than sugar. Navy bean pie came out of the Nation of Islam in the 1930s and reached full stride by the 60s, when Elijah Muhammad's How to Eat to Live told followers to reject the foods of slavery, sweet potatoes, collards, pork, and build a new diet from navy beans, whole wheat, and discipline. The pie was custard style, made from cooked and mashed navy beans, blended smooth with eggs, sugar, butter, cinnamon, nutmeg, and vanilla, then poured into a crust and baked until it set like its sweet potato cousin. The men who sold it wore dark suits and bow ties, standing on city corners beside stacks of the Final Call newspaper, offering slices wrapped in wax paper. The taste was milder than sweet potato pie, less earthy, almost like a spiced vanilla custard. And most people couldn't identify the main ingredient unless you told them. Bean pie was an act of reinvention. Like the X that replaced the surname, it said, "We choose what feeds us now." Wacky cake needed no eggs, no milk, no butter, just flour, sugar, cocoa, salt, baking soda, vegetable oil, vinegar, vanilla, and water. That was the recipe, born during wartime rationing when dairy and eggs were scarce, and it survived decades past the war because it was cheap, fast, and foolproof. You didn't even need a mixing bowl. The dry ingredients went straight into the baking pan, a 9x13 or an 8-inch square, and 3 wheels were pressed into the surface with the back of a spoon, oil in one, vinegar in another, vanilla in the third. Water poured over everything, stirred right there in the pan with a fork until the batter went smooth. The vinegar and baking soda reacted to give it lift, and the oil kept it moist without butter. It came out dark, tender, and honest, not as rich as a traditional chocolate cake, but satisfying in a way that had nothing to do with ingredients and everything to do with the fact that your mother made it from nothing, and nothing never tasted that good by accident. Tomato soup cake was the kind of recipe people kept quiet about, not out of shame, but because the reveal was half the fun. A can of Campbell's condensed tomato soup went straight into the batter alongside flour, sugar, baking soda, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, and shortening. The acid in the tomato reacted with the soda for lift, the moisture kept the crumbs soft, and the spices buried any savory notes so deep that nobody tasted tomato at all. What they tasted was something warm and faintly fruity, like a spice cake with a secret it refused to give up. Cream cheese frosting went on top, tangy enough to match whatever the soup was doing underneath. The recipe circulated through church bulletins and community cookbooks all through the 1960s, always handwritten, always credited to somebody's neighbor or cousin. Kids asked for it by name without knowing what was in it, and mothers smiled because the can of soup cost a dime and the cake fed 10. Ambrosia salad shimmered on every holiday table like a dessert that couldn't decide if it was serious or playing dress-up. The recipe traced back to at least 1867 when Dixie Cookery first printed a version with coconut, sugar, and orange segments. By the 1960s, it had picked up canned fruit cocktail, miniature marshmallows, maraschino cherries, and Cool Whip or sour cream, depending on whose kitchen you stood in. Everything got folded together cold and chilled in a glass bowl until it set just enough to hold a spoonful without collapsing. It appeared at Christmas, Easter, church homecomings, and any potluck where someone needed to bring something sweet without turning on the oven. The women who made it never called it cooking. They called it throwing it together. But they threw it together the same way every time, trusting that the proportions their mothers used were the right ones. When the bowl came back empty, that was the only review that mattered. If Ambrosia was a cold trick, fruit cocktail cake was the oven version of the same idea. Take a cheap can and turn it into celebration. A 15-cent can of fruit cocktail, juice and all, went directly into the cake batter with flour, sugar, eggs, and baking soda. No draining, no separating the cherries from the pears. The fruit distributed itself through the crumb during baking, turning each slice into a guessing game of color and texture. The topping was where the indulgence lived. Butter, sugar, evaporated milk, and coconut simmered on the stovetop until thick, then poured over the hot cake so it soaked into every crack. Some versions added chopped pecans, others left it plain and let the coconut do the work. Fruit cocktail cake was a 1960s staple because canned goods were currency in those kitchens. Shelf-stable, predictable, always on sale. You could make this cake without a trip to the store if your pantry was stocked right. Lazy Daisy cake earned its name honestly. It was the cake for the woman who didn't have time to fuss, but still wanted something worth putting on a plate. The base was a simple hot milk sponge, eggs beaten with sugar until thick, flour folded in, warm milk with butter stirred through at the end. It baked fast, barely 25 minutes, and came out plain and golden. Then the topping went on while the cake was still in the pan. Brown sugar, melted butter, shredded coconut, and a splash of cream spread across the surface and slid under the broiler. You had to watch it like a child near a stove because the difference between perfectly golden and black was about 45 seconds. The broiled topping bubbled and caramelized into a crunchy shell that crackled when you pressed a fork through it. The recipe dated back to the 1930s, but came back strong in the 60s when quick oats made the oatmeal variation easier. It was the cake that said, "I care enough to bake, but not enough to frost." Frozen lemonade pie belonged to the same family of no-bake miracles as Kool-Aid pie, but it leaned sharper, more grown up, with a tautness that cut through summer heat like a screen door slamming shut. 1 can of frozen lemonade concentrate, still cold from the freezer, stirred into a can of sweetened condensed milk. A tub of Cool Whip folded in until the whole thing turned pale yellow and pillowy. Poured into a graham cracker crust and frozen until firm. 4 ingredients, 5 minutes of work. No oven, no stove, no skill beyond stirring. The concentrate did everything. The acid thickened the condensed milk, the sugar balanced the sour, and the cold set it into something that sliced clean and melted slow on the tongue. Mothers made it on the hottest days in July when turning on the oven felt like punishment. Kids ate it on the porch, the filling softening fast in their hands, dripping down wrists before they could finish. Poke cake arrived in 1969 when Kraft printed the recipe on the back of Jell-O boxes, and within a year, it had colonized every church social and potluck supper in the country. You baked a white or yellow cake from a box, let it cool just enough to handle, then stabbed it all over with a fork. The deeper the holes, the more color would bleed through. Liquid Jell-O, still warm and not yet set, was poured slowly over the top and left to seep into every puncture. When the cake chilled and you sliced it, the inside was streaked with veins of bright red or green or orange, depending on the flavor. Cool Whip went on top to seal everything in. The kids didn't care about technique, they cared about the color. Strawberry Jell-O turned the cake pink. Lime turned it almost alien. Cherry made it look like it was bleeding. At church functions, there were always at least 2 poke cakes on the dessert table, and the one that got eaten first was always the one with the wildest color. Divinity candy separated the women who could make candy from the women who only thought they could. Sugar, corn syrup, and water boiled to hardball stage, 260 degrees, while egg whites were beaten stiff in a separate bowl. The boiling syrup was poured in a thin, steady stream into the egg whites while the mixer ran, and you beat and beat until the candy lost its gloss and held its shape when dropped from a spoon. Pecans folded in at the end. Spoonfuls dropped onto wax paper. The catch was the weather. Sugar is hygroscopic. It pulls moisture from the air. And on a humid day in Mississippi or Alabama, Divinity would never set. It would stay sticky, flat, and heartbreaking. The old women checked the sky before they started. If the clouds looked heavy, the candy waited. My grandmother made Divinity every December for 30 years. She could tell by the sound of the mixer when it was ready, a change in pitch, a slight resistance in the bowl. I have her recipe card, I have her mixer, I still can't hear what she heard. The sticky sweet smell of popcorn balls carried from the kitchen to every room in the house, and that was how you knew something was happening. A church bazaar to prep for, a Halloween treat to bag, or just a Saturday when your mother felt like making something with her hands. Corn syrup, sugar, butter, and a little vinegar went into a saucepan and boiled until a drop in cold water cracked between your teeth. That hot syrup got poured over a bowl of freshly popped stovetop corn, and you shaped the balls fast, hands greased with butter to keep the molten sugar from welding to your skin. Kids stood in line, fingers slick, pulling at the warm mass and pressing it round. Some mothers added food coloring, red for Christmas, orange for Halloween. Some stirred in peanuts or candy corn. Each ball got wrapped in wax paper, twisted at the ends, lined up on the counter like little gifts that cost nothing and meant everything. 7-Up cake stood tall on the counter, pale gold and citrus bright, with a glaze that pooled into the bundt pan's ridges like morning light caught in glass. The recipe appeared in a 7-Up promotional booklet in 1953, but it reached its peak in the 60s when Black mothers in the South discovered that the soda made pound cake lighter and moister than milk or buttermilk ever could. Butter, sugar, eggs, flour, lemon extract, and a full 7 ounces of 7-Up. The carbonation acted as leavening, pushing the batter upward into a crumb so tender it barely held together on the fork. A lemon glaze went over the top while the cake was warm enough to drink it in. This was the cake that showed up at funerals and repasts, carried by women who knew that grief needed something sweet on the table. It was also the cake that sat cooling when someone came home from the hospital, or moved into a new house, or just needed to be reminded that somebody cared. Pineapple icebox cake belonged to a time before air conditioning, when the oven was the enemy and the refrigerator did all the work. Vanilla wafers or graham crackers were layered with a filling made from canned crushed pineapple, whipped cream or Cool Whip, and sometimes lemon gelatin or vanilla pudding. The assembled cake went into the icebox overnight, and by morning the wafers had softened into something between cake and custard, the pineapple juice seeping through every layer until the whole thing cut like a terrine. The name itself was a relic. Icebox predated refrigerator in common speech, and the women who used it had grown up with actual ice boxes, heavy wooden cabinets cooled by blocks of ice delivered weekly. By the 1960s, electric refrigerators were standard, but the name stuck because the cake stuck. It showed up at summer gatherings, wrapped in foil, already sliced, already vanishing. Bread pudding started with failure. Stale bread, dry heels, the slices nobody wanted from the middle of the week. In New Orleans and across the deep South, Black mothers soaked that bread in a custard of eggs, milk, sugar, vanilla, and cinnamon until it collapsed into something soft and swollen, then baked it until the top went golden and the center trembled. The bread disappeared into the custard and came back as something else entirely. But the whiskey sauce was the real conversation. Butter, sugar, and a heavy pour of bourbon cooked together until the alcohol burned off just enough to leave its warmth without its bite. Poured hot over the warm pudding, it pooled in every crack and turned a thrifty dessert into something reckless. Grown folks got the version with the sauce. Kids got theirs plain, or with sweetened condensed milk if they were lucky. The bread that should have been thrown away became the best thing on the table. Homemade pralines required a feel that no recipe card could teach you. Brown sugar, white sugar, cream, butter, vanilla, and pecan halves. That was the list, but the list meant nothing without the hands. You brought the mixture to softball stage, 236 degrees, but the women in New Orleans who made pralines for a living didn't own thermometers. They dropped a bead of syrup into cold water and rolled it between their fingers. If it held shape but flattened when pressed, it was ready. You pulled the pot off the heat and stirred hard until the candy went from glossy to matte, then spooned it fast onto wax paper before it seized. Each praline spread into a flat disc, pecans fanned out, the surface cooling from liquid gold to a crumbly shell that shattered when you bit through to the soft center. 5 seconds too long on the heat and you had fudge. 5 seconds too short and you had syrup. The women who got it right every time never explained how. They just did it. Now we reached the desserts that didn't just feed you, they placed you somewhere specific, in a yard, at a table, beside someone you can still picture. Pig picking cake got its name from North Carolina barbecue gatherings, where a whole hog roasted over coals, and the dessert had to hold its own against the smoke. Yellow cake mix, mandarin oranges with the juice, eggs and oil beaten together and baked in layers. The filling was crushed pineapple folded into instant vanilla pudding and Cool Whip, cold, sweet, impossibly light against the dense cake. The fruit kept everything moist for days, which mattered because this cake traveled. It rode in back seats to church picnics, reunions, and 4th of July cookouts wrapped in foil with a name and marker on the side so the dish came back to the right woman. There was always an argument about whose was best, and the argument was never settled because settling it would have ended the tradition of everyone bringing one. Sugar cookies were the dessert you made with someone, not for someone. Flour, butter, sugar, eggs, vanilla, and a pinch of salt mixed into a dough that went into the icebox until it firmed, then rolled out on a flour counter with a rolling pin that might have been your grandmother's. Cookie cutters were a luxury most kitchens didn't have. You used the rim of a drinking glass for circles, a knife for rough stars, and your imagination for everything else. The cookies baked fast, 8 minutes at most, and came out pale and soft. Colored sugar went on before baking if you had it. A thin glaze of powdered sugar and milk went on after if you didn't. Christmas was the season, but sugar cookies also showed up at baby showers and any afternoon when a mother wanted her kids in the kitchen instead of on the street. The dough stuck to small hands. The flour covered everything. The finished cookies were uneven, cracked, imperfect. And that was the whole point. They carried fingerprints. Some of those fingerprints belonged to people who aren't here anymore. Peanut butter fudge was the version you made when chocolate was too expensive or the cocoa tin was empty. Sugar, milk, butter, and a thick scoop of peanut butter cooked on the stove until it reached the same soft ball stage as regular fudge, then beaten and poured into a buttered dish to set. It came out pale, dense, and grainy in a way that chocolate fudge never was. The peanut butter gave it a dry sweetness that stuck to the roof of your mouth and made you reach for milk. It was cheaper by half. A jar of peanut butter lasted weeks, and the sugar was the only real cost. In the 1960s, when a jar of Jiffy ran about 35 cents, a pan of peanut butter fudge could feed a dozen kids for a dime. Mothers cut it into squares and wrapped them in wax paper for school lunches, or stacked them on plates at holiday gatherings where the chocolate fudge disappeared first, but the peanut butter fudge was what people came back for. It was always the second choice, and it was always the one you remembered longest. Dump cake asked nothing of you. No mixing, no measuring eggs, no cream and butter, no technique at all. A can of fruit, usually cherry pie filling or crushed pineapple, dumped into a baking dish. A box of yellow cake mix scattered dry over the top. Thin slices of butter laid across the surface like tiles into the oven, and that was it. The butter melted down through the dry mix, the fruit bubbled up from below, and somewhere in between they met and made something, part cobbler, part cake, entirely its own category. The edges went crispy where the butter pooled. The center stayed soft and fruity, almost molten. It fed a crowd for under $1 in 1965, and the woman who brought it to the church supper didn't apologize for how easy it was. Dump cake was the last dessert my mother made before her hands started shaking too much to hold the butter knife steady. She made it because she could still make it. That mattered more than any recipe that required precision. Pecan candy showed up at gas stations, roadside stands, and rest stops all across the South. Stuckey's sold pecan log rolls wrapped in bright blue and white packaging, stacked behind the register between the boiled peanuts and the saltwater taffy. But the homemade version was different. Nougat or Divinity centers rolled in fresh caramel and pressed into chopped pecans, each piece shaped by hand and laid on wax paper to cool. The caramel was soft and pooling, the pecans crunched against it, and the nougat inside dissolved sweet and powdery on the tongue. Making it was a family production. Someone stirred the caramel, someone chopped the nuts, someone rolled, and the youngest ones stood by waiting for the pieces that broke or the caramel that dripped off the edge of the counter. Pecan candy was a gift you gave at Christmas to neighbors, teachers, and the church secretary. It came in tins and boxes and plastic bags tied with ribbon, and every piece was proof that somebody spent an afternoon thinking about you. Jell-O mold trembled on the serving plate like it knew it was the last thing anyone expected to cry over. Flavored gelatin dissolved in boiling water, mixed with cold, poured over canned fruit cocktail or mandarin oranges, then chilled in a decorative ring mold until it set firm and jewel bright. Unmolding was the performance, a quick dip in warm water, a plate pressed to the top, a flip, and a prayer. When it released clean and perfect, wobbling but holding shape, the whole kitchen exhaled. Jell-O molds were everywhere in the 1950s and 60s, at church socials, baby showers, and covered dish suppers where the table already sagged under the weight of everything everyone brought. Lime was the most popular. Strawberry was the prettiest. Orange with mandarin segments looked like stained glass when the light hit it. The mold your grandmother used is probably still in a cabinet somewhere, copper-colored or aluminum, dented at the rim. Nobody uses it anymore, but nobody throws it away either, because throwing it away would mean admitting she's not coming back to fill it.
Syllabub was the elegant Christmas drink dessert that African-American families served in their finest glasses when company came calling during the holidays. This frothy mixture of cream, sugar, wine or sherry, and lemon juice was whipped until it held soft peaks, then spooned into cups where it slowly separated into cream on top and sweet liquid below. The name sounded fancy and the presentation impressed, but the recipe was simple enough for any cook to master. Black families learned Syllabub from plantation kitchens and made it their own, sometimes substituting homemade wine or adding nutmeg for warmth. Guests would eat the cream with spoons, then drink the sweet wine that pooled beneath. 2 desserts in one. Syllabub required no baking, no special equipment, just good cream and patience with the whipping. It represented the kind of old-fashioned elegance that Christmas once demanded. A reminder that celebration meant elevating everyday ingredients into something worth savoring slowly. Bourbon balls carried adult sophistication onto Christmas candy platters, their boozy centers reserved for grown-up gatherings where children weren't meant to partake. Crushed vanilla wafers mixed with cocoa, powdered sugar, and corn syrup formed the base, but the bourbon was the soul, enough to taste without overwhelming, creating warmth that spread through the chest with each bite. The mixture was rolled into balls, then coated in additional powdered sugar or dipped in chocolate for a more refined presentation. Unlike baked goods where alcohol cooked away, bourbon balls kept their kick, the spirits mellowing over days of storage but never disappearing entirely. Church ladies made them for holiday parties, understanding that some traditions belonged exclusively to adults. The candy represented the dual nature of Black holiday celebrations. Family-friendly festivities alongside adult pleasures kept separate but equally treasured. Bourbon balls connected Christmas to other occasions where spirits flowed and good times followed. Crab cakes formed into mini patties were seafood luxury that made Thanksgiving feel extra special. The sweet crab meat mixed with breadcrumbs and seasonings before being pan-fried until golden. Grandmothers would pick through cans of crab meat to remove any shell pieces, then gently fold the delicate meat with beaten eggs, breadcrumbs, mayonnaise, mustard, Old Bay seasoning, and sometimes diced bell peppers. The mixture was formed into small patties, each one handled carefully, then refrigerated briefly to help them hold together during cooking. The crab cakes were pan-fried in butter until golden brown on both sides, the exterior developing a crispy crust while the interior stayed moist and packed with sweet crab flavor. In the 1970s, Black households, crab cakes represented coastal sophistication, bringing seafood traditions to holiday tables and elevating the appetizer spread. Children loved mini crab cakes because they felt fancy, tasted sweet rather than fishy, and came in sizes perfect for young appetites. Sardine spread offered affordable protein and bold flavor on African-American Christmas appetizer tables, transforming canned fish into celebration food. Sardines were mashed with cream cheese, lemon juice, hot sauce, and minced onion until smooth enough to spread on crackers. The flavor was assertive, briny, rich, and unmistakably fishy, but devotees considered that intensity the whole point. Families appreciated how a single can of sardines combined with pantry staples could feed a dozen guests, making the spread economical. The preparation took minutes, allowing cooks to focus on more demanding dishes while still offering variety. Children often avoided sardine spread, but adults who grew up eating it sought it out at gatherings, disappointed when it didn't appear. The tradition connected to times when canned fish provided essential nutrition during lean periods, with Christmas elevating survival food. Sardine spread reminded families that flavor didn't require expensive ingredients, just confidence in traditional tastes. Pralines were the Christmas candy that connected African American families to New Orleans traditions, a creamy pecan confection that spread through Black communities across the South. Made from brown sugar, butter, cream, and whole pecans, pralines required careful attention to temperature and timing to achieve their signature texture: creamy yet firm, sweet yet deeply caramelized. Black families made pralines in large batches during weeks before Christmas, storing them in tins for gift-giving and visitors. The process was social, with women gathering in kitchens to stir, test, and drop the candy onto buttered marble or wax paper. Children learned to judge readiness by the way the mixture fell from a spoon, forming soft mounds that set into perfect circles. Each family had their own ratio of pecans to sugar, some preferring more nuts, others favoring creamier candy. Pralines were given to teachers, mail carriers, and church members as tokens. This candy carried culture and community in every bite. Rock candy grew slowly on strings suspended in sugar syrup, the crystals forming over days into geological wonders that fascinated children. The process required patience that tested young minds. Supersaturated sugar solution poured into jars, strings dangled from pencils laid across the openings, then waiting while crystals slowly accumulated. Black families made rock candy because it taught children about patience and science while producing treats that cost almost nothing. The crystals could be tinted with food coloring, creating red, green, or blue formations that looked like precious gems. After a week or more, the strings were lifted, revealing sugar formations that crackled when bitten. Rock candy wasn't fancy, but it was magical, watching sugar transform from liquid to solid, from dissolved to crystallized. Children remembered making rock candy long after the taste faded, the process mattering more than the product. This candy represented learning disguised as treat-making. Ham biscuits made with country ham and soft dinner rolls became handheld sandwiches that children devoured, the salty ham contrasting perfectly with the sweet, buttery rolls that held everything together. Mothers would slice country ham paper thin, the intensely salty, cured meat packed with flavor that needed only small amounts to satisfy, then tuck the slices into soft dinner rolls that had been split and buttered. Some families brushed the tops of the assembled biscuits with melted butter and baked them briefly to warm everything through and create slightly crispy tops. The combination of salty, savory ham with soft, slightly sweet rolls created perfect flavor balance that kept people coming back for more. In 1970s Black households, ham biscuits represented Southern tradition, appetizers that could be prepared ahead and served at room temperature. Children loved ham biscuits because they were familiar comfort food in easy-to-eat form, requiring no plates or utensils and perfect for grabbing. Deviled ham spread turned leftover Christmas ham into appetizers, stretching holiday abundance across days of family visiting. Cooks ground or finely chopped cooked ham, blending with mayonnaise, mustard, pickle relish, and hot sauce until reaching perfect spreading consistency. The mixture was packed into crocks, ready to spread on crackers whenever guests arrived unexpectedly. The term deviled referred to spice and mustard, giving the spread its distinctive kick, transforming plain ham into something with personality. Families appreciated how spread made a little ham go far, feeding dozens from what might otherwise be a single sandwich. Children loved helping grind ham through hand-cranked meat grinders, turning handles while adults added seasonings. The spread kept for days, improving as flavors melded together. This appetizer represented the African-American philosophy of abundance through creativity, making sure no guest left hungry and no food went to waste during the most important gathering season of the entire year. Egg custard pie was the delicate Christmas dessert that African-American families made when they wanted something lighter than the rich cakes dominating holiday tables. The filling was simple: eggs, sugar, milk, vanilla, and a whisper of nutmeg, baked in a flaky crust until the custard set with a gentle wobble in the center. The top developed a golden skin dusted with nutmeg that looked like Christmas itself. Black families valued this pie because eggs were often available from backyard chickens, making it affordable even in lean years. The texture was silky and cool, a welcome contrast to heavy holiday meals. Children loved its gentle sweetness, and elders appreciated its digestibility after days of rich food. Egg custard pie required patience. Baking too fast would curdle the filling, too slow would make it weep. Grandmothers knew their ovens intimately, adjusting temperatures by feel. This pie was simplicity perfected, proof that Christmas elegance needed nothing more than eggs, cream, and care.
Every one of these tasted better in a kitchen that doesn't exist anymore. Drop yours in the comments before the flavor fades.